Hello everyone. Welcome to the inaugural review on the Mindful Ear Audio Reviews channel. I'm your host, Josh, and I'm very excited to share my first review of the Matrix Audio Mini iPro 3 high-resolution streamer, DAC, and headphone amplifier. The Mini iPro 3 was provided to me courtesy of Apos Audio, for whom I am an affiliate reviewer, as well as having been a customer in the past. As disclaimer, standard stuff in this game, I do not receive financial compensation from Apos Audio for reviewing the gear they send me, and I do have to send the review samples back when I'm done with them. So, out of the box, the Mini iPro 3 is a very compact device, measuring about 8.5 inches in length, 8 inches in width, and about 2 inches in height. Only weighs about just shy of 4 pounds. On the front of the device, you have a large push-button rotary knob used to control input selection and volume control. Also on the front, you have your standard single-ended 1/4 inch headphone jack, as well as a balanced 4.4 millimeter headphone jack. And you've got a nice 3.3 inch color or OLED screen right here. Moving to the back of the device. First thing I want to highlight for you is this little button right here. This is your admin settings button right next to your power port and Ethernet. This little button right here lets you access more of the administrative features of the device, such as firmware updates, network selection, and also lets you access the DAC filters that are user selectable and actually do have an audible impact on the sound, which we'll talk about later. Power connection is standard IEC, which is great if you need a longer cable or you want something fancier, more robust. And also in the box, you get the quick start guide, warranty card, standard stuff, as well as an RM3 remote control, mostly plastic as well as, but with a nice metal face on it that lets you access the DAC features via a dedicated button, as well as dedicated buttons for streaming, Bluetooth, and other inputs, as well as volume control. So starting out with some of the big features about this device. It is fully room ready. It is a high-resolution streamer supporting Qobuz and Tidal, as well as high-resolution files from your digital music collection. The inputs are extensive. You've got Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, like mentioned, and the Bluetooth is 5.0 version, and the Wi-Fi supports all the current standards, so you don't have to worry about compatibility, even if you've got an older router or a brand new router. You've got Ethernet, USB-C, coaxial and optical input, I2S for more advanced integration, and analog RCA inputs. The design is fully balanced from DAC to headphone amplifier. And there are 7 selectable DAC filters, which we're going to talk about in a little bit because they do matter. And the cool thing about the color display on the front of this device is that there's about 5 or 6 different settings for it. Some of them are monochromatic, some of them are color, and some will even display album art on it, depending on what your input source is. Moving into some detailed specifications. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because there's a lot. If you want to know about all the different bit rates, formats supported, click on the link in the description and you'll have their list right there. The DAC stage is built around an ESS E9038Q2M chipset, pretty high-performing chipset from ESS. Briefly, supported formats and bit rates are very, very comprehensive. PCM goes all the way up to 768 kilohertz, DSD up to 45 megahertz natively, and of course you've got MQA support up to the Studio Stream format. Both the analog and inputs and outputs boast very low distortion as well as high signal-to-noise ratios, which is really, really fantastic for an all-in-one device like this. Briefly, headphone output power, the single-ended headphone output. 1/4 inch jack is going to give you about 1300 milliwatts of power at 33 ohms, and going up to 600 ohms load, you've got 133 milliwatts there. Balanced output offers 1900 milliwatts at 33 ohms and 510 milliwatts at 600 ohms. So this guy's got a lot of power behind it and should be able to drive the overwhelming majority of high demand planars as well as your dynamic driver stuff. So some specs out of the way, let's talk about how the device performs and sounds in a variety of use scenarios. Some realistic stuff here. I've had the Pro 3 with me for about a month, and I've put it through its paces as both a desktop headphone solution, which is what it's intended for, as well as a DAC and streamer in my home stereo. For reference, I have an iFi IDSD Diablo portable DAC amp, which puts out 5 watts of power, or compared to the just shy of 2 watts for the Matrix. And the Diablo sound signature, and what I'm used to, is transparent, detailed, and very, very accurate and clean. My reference streamer for comparison to the Matrix is a Bluesound Node 2i, which is the version, not the current version, but the previous one without USB audio support. And to clear up confusion around the Node stuff, most people, as well as Bluesound, are referring to the current generation Node as just simply the Node. Now, headphone performance. The single-ended and balanced outputs are clean and distortion-free all the way up to some really loud volumes. For reference, when I'm listening to my home stereo, and the wife isn't home, I'm cranking stuff upwards of 75, 80, 85 decibels. It gets loud. And my headphones, a little bit quieter, but still pretty loud compared to what most people listen to. Briefly, my test gear includes the Dan Clark Audio Aeon 2 closed back planars, as well as the Etherflow 1.1 open back planars. I've got the Drop and Sennheiser HD6XX, Mezzi Audio 99 Noirs, Highland Headphones Saturn open backs, and for IEMs, I got the Moondrop S8 in our balanced armature in your monitors. Now, for all the headphones I tested it with, I tried to do both single-ended and balanced testing if I had the cables for it. Only ones I didn't do that with are the Mezzis and the Highlands. And what's really fantastic is that between single-ended and balanced, the sound is the same. That is really crucial if you don't want to spend money on balanced cables, or, balanced is just too much power for your stuff like IEMs. The overall sound signature of the Pro 3 is highly refined, detailed, with excellent dynamics. Tonality, or how actual notes and instruments and vocals sound compared to real life, is very, very good. And there is no hint of sibilance, that kind of harshness and treble, or that tinsel kind of sound that is typical of recordings from the 90s and 2000s loudness wars, such as Disturbed, Icon for Hire, Seether, and other groups like that. Now, when you use the DAC filters, that doesn't introduce any sibilance at all. You might get a little bit of accentuation in highs or mids or lows, but generally the DAC filter is not going to completely change the sound. It's just going to slightly enhance little things here and there. And the cool thing about that is the DAC filters allow for better pairing and synergy with the gear you have. So, compared to my reference Diablo DAC, the level of detail that the Matrix provides is better, and it doesn't have the occasional harshness and the treble that the Diablo will produce with poor quality recordings like the stuff I mentioned already. At first, when listening, the treble can seem kind of rolled off, but that's not the case. The Pro 3 is simply providing you with a wonderfully finessed presentation of the artist's intent, and that is what this is all about, as well as just experimenting with stuff and having fun. When there is supposed to be really bright treble, you've got it, but it's not harsh. It's got impact to it, it's got power to it, but it's not digging down in your ear and irritating things. There is a great sense of air and space, and it's not artificial sounding either, like some DACs and amps will produce, especially when messing around with different kinds of filters. Mid-range, deeply layered from front to back. It's immersive, and it blends seamlessly with the lows and the highs. I just did my hand thing backwards. That's cool. And the bass itself is very well controlled and accurate. It actually reminds me of the bass control of my Class A Sigma Amp 2 that I have in my home system, which is a $3,400 amp by comparison. Now, I did run a test where I fed the Diablo's balanced output into the analog input of the Pro 3. I used an XLR RCA converter, so it wasn't a true balanced input. And the sibilance the Diablo provides sometimes, with that crystal clear accuracy, can show up in the Matrix if you're doing a pairing like that. So if you're going to pair another DAC with the Matrix and use the Matrix mostly as a headphone amp rather than just pure DAC and streamer, that's something to consider. Another thing that I noticed is that when doing analog input into the Matrix, it will do analog to digital conversion, go through the DAC stage, and then output to the headphone's own amp stage. This is actually something I've encountered on another piece of gear that I own, the Monoprice Monolith desktop amp, which was one of my first balanced designs that I got back in the day, about 3-4 years ago. And it's still a very good piece of gear, very neutral and accurate, but both Monoprice and the Matrix are going to do that analog to digital conversion, even if you're feeding it an analog signal and expecting it to go to the headphone amp purely. Now, little teaser for you here. I've been running the Pro 3 with an X-Duo MT604 balanced Class A tube hybrid amp that Apos surprised me with about a week ago, and it's a really, really good pairing. Even though the X-Duo is way cheaper than the Matrix is $1,025 USD retail, depending on where you get it from, especially from Apos. And the X-Duo is only $179 USD. And you would think that this kind of disparity would not be a good pairing, that the X-Duo would drown out or suppress all the detail and everything in the Matrix. Not the case. The X-Duo amp is fantastic and gives you the option of tube rolling too. That's going to be an upcoming review, so please like, subscribe, and follow so you don't miss out on these upcoming reviews. So, objective performance in real-world use. Briefly, I tested out the Pro 3 as a USB DAC connected to both my MacBook Pro, which is a 2020 Intel model, as well as to my iPhone 11. I've been using the Apple USB camera adapter, the newest one, that's just the USB port, not all the ports on it, as well as an iFi iSilencer Pro in the USB chain for both phone and laptop. All of my stuff comes from my Roon server, which has my Tidal, my Qobuz, as well as my CD rips on it. I have auto volume leveling enabled, which for Roon is non-destructive, doesn't mess with dynamic range, and it keeps an even volume across all your music sources, regardless of the edition of recording you're using, etc. The wireless signal path, I tested that obviously. Wi-Fi to my router, my MacBook Pro, my Mac Mini Roon core, hardwired into Ethernet. Really, really fantastic. Zero difference in sound between Wi-Fi, Ethernet, and USB DAC usage, which is fantastic. Great implementation from Matrix on the Ethernet and Wi-Fi inputs. I also gave Bluetooth connection a try with both my MacBook Pro as well as my wife's iPhone XR because she was having trouble getting AirPlay to work for some reason, so we just tried Bluetooth. And the Bluetooth sounded pretty dang good, both in headphone and home stereo use. Obviously, you're not getting lossless quality with the Bluetooth, especially on iPhones, because Apple's kind of just dragging their feet on that, but it was good enough to just sit back and enjoy and be happy, which is what we want. Now, there are some key things I've learned over the past few weeks about this device, just using it on a day-to-day basis. And one of these is that when I've got the Matrix hooked up to my laptop, USB mode, running certain applications will actually interfere with the sound signal some. For example, if I open up Safari on my Mac, there's a brief little skip in the sound. It's really, really weird. None of my other apps seem to do it, whether it's Microsoft Office, FaceTime, or whatever. But the Safari, for some reason, whether you start it up and under heavy, heavy load, like 10 plus tabs, will kind of mess with the output over USB, which is bizarre. And that's more than likely an Apple issue and not a issue with the DAC itself. Now, when you're streaming over Wi-Fi and you go to skip around, there's a momentary pause. And it's the same on Ethernet too. It's just the signal getting to the DAC. And it takes maybe 1 to 3 seconds, but it's really not that bad. It's something that we can live with realistically. Some other things, talking about how the inputs work. If you're got Wi-Fi set up and then you go to plug in your Ethernet cable instead, it is not automatically going to slave to the Ethernet input. It's still going to be on Wi-Fi unless you go into that admin settings menu, little button on the back, and you actually select it in there. And that's the same for Bluetooth as well. You have to manually select the Bluetooth input on the DAC itself, whether you use the dedicated button on the remote or input controls on the DAC itself. The unit does automatically slave to headphone outputs when you plug something into it. And when you unplug, it reverts it to its previous output, whether it was a line out or whatever. Bluetooth is pretty easy to set up, But it does, the Bluetooth name of the device doesn't show up exactly like Matrix Audio Mini iPro 3. It's got a slightly different name to it. So it can be a little bit confusing at first, but once you've got it, you're good. Just keep in mind that you have to manually change the input on the device, or else it'll always try to pull from Bluetooth or whatever. Something else that was a little frustrating. This is a device at the $1,000 price point, right? It's not cheap. It's cheap for a good quality all-in-one, but there's something missing, specifically Spotify Connect support. Even though this is a high-resolution intended streamer, at this price point, it should just have Spotify baked in. The reason why is because Spotify's music library is larger than Tidal and Qobuz overall. Typically, Tidal and Qobuz, you have to mix and match them to get the same stuff that Spotify will give you in one. And Spotify's music algorithms and how it learns about your musical tastes and makes suggestions is top notch. Tidal and Qobuz aren't quite there yet, and even the algorithms in Rune aren't quite up to Spotify's capabilities. So really would have been better to have Spotify Connect on this thing. That way you could get that more lossless input over Wi-Fi and not use Bluetooth. But like I said, the Bluetooth is still very good quality, and it'll do the job if you're just searching around for music trying to find stuff. Switching inputs via remote can be a tiny bit laggy. It's about 2-3 second delay before it displays the input on the screen and starts going through them. So if I hit the digital input button here, it's going to start out with coax, and then optical is the next one. So I'm going to have to go click, click, just wait for a moment, and then it'll show up and do the change. Kind of annoying. Again, $1,000 device, it should really be a little bit snappier. But again, it's something we can live with because it could be way worse. Could be way, way worse. So long as you're patient with it, so long as you understand it, you're going to be good. Another gripe I have, and this one's about the remote. At the $1,000 price point, the remote should be completely metal, period. The faceplate on it is metal, back part is not. Shit Audio makes full metal remotes. They're like $13 on their website, and they're great. I've got one. I have a Shit Saga preamp. It's awesome. So if Shit can put together inexpensive metal remotes that are good quality, Matrix could have done this too. Especially because this remote, like I said, is shared across the Matrix product line, including their $3,000 plus DACs and streamers, which at that point, come on, full metal remote, please. Love-hate relationship with the menu button on the back, but at the same time, it keeps the front of the device clean and removes the possibility of you accidentally bumping stuff. Volume adjustment could be better in that it's kind of slow. It's done in half decibel increments, and there's no acceleration once you start spinning the wheel or clicking or holding the remote faster. However, if you do hold down the remote button, it will continuously raise or lower the volume, and you don't have to continuously click it. Remote features, you got your power on, standby, mute, volume up, down, DAC filters, digital input, analog input, Bluetooth and streaming audio, which is really, really convenient if you're using the Matrix in a desktop scenario where you can't just like reach over to it. It's kind of away from you, or if you're using it in a home stereo solution. Speaking of home stereo, performance was superb. The streamer of the Matrix is faster than the Bluesound Node 2i, period. Doesn't matter whether it's over Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, or Ethernet. It's just better. The DAC inside it, the ESS chipset, massively outclasses the Burr Brown chipset in the Node 2i. And the Node 2i's DAC is not a slouch. It's pretty decent, but it's nowhere near as good as the Matrix. Remote controls got range. I sit about 8 feet away from my media center when I'm on my couch. No issues with signal dropout or, missing the cue for it to change stuff. Downside to using it in a home stereo situation is the screen's only 3.3 inches wide and about yay tall. So it's kind of difficult to see what's going on the screen unless you're sitting a little bit closer or you've got some eagle eyes on you. Comparing the DAC stage with my reference Diablo, music in stereo is substantially better. More refinement, better layering, and I'm running a full component system. I've got JM Lab Chorus 715 mains, Rel T5i sub, the aforementioned tube preamp from Shit, the Class A amp I mentioned, and some other stuff in there too. Now, Focal speakers sometimes get a bad rap for being overly bright and harsh, but that is just simply not the case. I own the JM Lab Chorus 15s as well as Focal Chorus 706V monitors. And they both have very different tweeters on them too. They are not harsh and bright, they are accurate and neutral. And that is something a lot of people don't like. They kind of like the little more rolled off treble. That's similar to the Harman tuning curve. That's perfectly fine. That said, brightness and harshness is something you can deal with via room treatment, the proper positioning of your speakers, as well as the gear synergy you've got going on. So, and even at 90 decibels, again, wife was out of the house, cranked it up, no harshness, no distortion, absolutely fantastic. Big changes I noticed in my stereo with the Matrix in the loop. Increased nuance and control in the mid bass and sub bass, which was really cool because the Rel T5i I'm running is only it's a small 8-inch, 110 watt subwoofer. Entry level, not humongous, still very good. The fact that I got more out of that sub just because I changed the DAC, awesome. Because I'm a bit of a bass head. I love neutral, but I love bass too. The vocals, both male and female, have more body to them, and there's more fine details such as the lip smacking, the falsetto, and then when you get into genres like metal and rock, the gutturals are easier to distinguish and actually understand as words and not just pig squeals. Even YouTube videos, which the audio is compressed on, I still don't understand why people use YouTube videos for sound demos. It's not lossless. It is not CD quality. Stop doing it, please. Thank you. Anyways, there's no sibilance in YouTube when watching on my TV and feeding it through the Matrix, which is really, really cool. Now, your mileage is going to vary with the Matrix depending on the headphones, IEMs, and stereo gear you have. So you may not get the same experience as me, even if you had my exact stereo system. If your room is different from mine, it's not going to sound the same. Room treatment matters. Stick with the basics. Master that stuff. Play with the gear then. That said, thank you so much for tuning in. This has been a blast talking to you guys. I understand the review is a tiny bit on the long side, but I really hope that you enjoyed it and that you got something useful from it. There's going to be a link for the Matrix in the description. I'll throw in some information about my test rig and my stereo. And thank you very much. Mind your ears. Happy listening.